live. Hi, this is Anna Imagination with a Healing Garden, and thank you for joining me for Shifting Perspectives. If you are new to my channel, I am a philosopher, psychologist, sociologist of 30 years. Right now, I am working through the logical fallacies of projection, and I've got a lot here that's just really bothering me. And whenever you have a feeling of something bothering you, it is because you are experiencing cognitive dissonance, which is caused by illogic in your system. Human beings are highly logical. We are very logical. And right down to our emotions, everything with a human being is precisely logical. And when you have something that is not logical to your logical system, you have an emotion called cognitive dissonance that then penetrates your entire system, and it feels uncomfortable. The discomfort is caused by a lack of logic or a lack of comprehension, which feeds to the logic. So I am pulling apart projection, which we decided in the last video when I walked through the logical argument that it is a part of anger. Projection is basically the first level of 3 of basically self-defense. It's defense. So when you look at, and I was explaining this before, you basically have these levels of anger. You have being bothered, and then frustrated, and then annoyed, and then anger. And then anger has 3 levels to it. The first level is when you project. The second level, and that's when violence and aggression happens, passive aggressive happens. And that's what we're going to talk about more, is right there what happens on that third level. The second one is communication, and the top level of anger is change. That's when you apply data analysis and problem solving. Now, which one of these levels you decide to use is a conscious decision that you make only after you have achieved ethical growth. The ethical growth is linked to the 12 stages of growth as outlined in Spiral Dynamics. And if you are a 1 through 4 perspective, if you are in the stages of growth 1 through 4, then you're going to project. Almost every time you're going to project. The closer you are to that first and second level, the more likely you're going to project. When you get to third level, aggressor, you're absolutely projecting. If you're not projecting on others, you're most likely projecting on yourselves. And when you get to that 4th perspective, that is when you start to kind of try to communicate. But if it breaks down, then you go back to projection. Now, 5th perspective and 8th perspective, 5th to 8th, 5th and up is communication. But there is strategic communication. From the 5th perspective to 8th perspective, you most likely will experience ineffective communication. You'll try communicating, but it's most likely going to be ineffective because it's not until the 8th perspective that you actually learn efficient communication skills. In order to get to 8th perspective, you have to clock in a certain number of amount currently unknown, but you have to clock in a certain number of communication to occur. So once you get a certain set number of communication clocked in, then you experience efficient communication. Once you experience efficient communication, you can actually enter the problem solving area where you're using data analysis in a conflict. Oh, look at that. Inability to effectively manage conflict. This is conflict resolution. Did not know this. It is located right here, which is going to be your first and your second communication. Oh, you beautiful man. That is what's wrong. Holy fucking shit. There is the link in your illogic, my dear. Okay, so yeah, if you have poor communication skills, then you are going to suffer and struggle with conflict resolution because you don't know how to effectively communicate or effectively resolve conflict because you lack this information. So what you need to do then is basically become efficient at communication, and you have to become knowledgeable about what the tools that you're using. This is data analysis and problem solving, but a lot of people lack the amount of speaking hours that have been clocked in. We see this very common with people who have a fear of talking, associate talking with being punished, associate talking with significant trauma. So as a result, they don't talk and they don't clock in the hours required to have effective communication skills. Now, projection is everything that takes place at that first level of anger, projection. And projection can be materialize. There you go. Projection can materialize in multiple ways. The ways that projection materializes is passive aggression. Well, let's go through this. You have aggression. This can be verbal aggression. This can be name calling. Let's keep it simple here, because verbal aggression, you have name calling, you have labels, you have deterioration, and you have slander, character assassination. And then the other kind is physical aggression. Physical aggression is your violence. And then you have perspective aggression. This is when people attack your point of view, attack your self-trust, and they attack your logic. They attack your logic. And then you have passive aggression. Passive aggression is when they are active, they are being aggressive towards you, but they're hiding it. They're hiding it in sarcasm. That's what sarcasm is. Sarcasm is not comedy. Sarcasm is passive aggression. They are hiding it in sarcasm. But the other kind of this, now you can do this. This is, by the way, this is projection. This is 100% projection. You can project this toward the self or others. If you are a people pleaser, then you're going to project this aggression toward yourself. You're going to hold yourself responsible. And there it is. You are holding yourself responsible for results. And is it a punishment? Why do we do it? Yes, it's learning. Attempted learning. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it this way? See, internalization is actually how learning is done. Why is this being transferred over to, and this is the same concept. This is exactly what corporal punishment is based on. Corporal punishment is linked to this. Now, why is corporal punishment linked to this? There's something going on here. It is the concept that a negative or displeasure is a great teacher, is an excellent teacher. That is the toxic belief. Negative or displeasure is an excellent teacher. So we create the displeasure. We use projection to create the displeasure. Teach. Wow, that's ineffective teaching. Holy shit, is that ineffective teaching? Why do we do this? Why do we do this? Why do we do this? Logically, well, because it would be illogical. The most Occam's razor, the most logical explanation why we do this is because we don't know better. It's like when a child burns their hand. Consequence, 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 consequence. There's something there to do with consequence. Consequence, consequence. It's when you choose to create control, 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 control. When you choose to create the consequence. It's projected control, projected control. I got it here. Just give me a second here. This is projected control. Projected control onto self and others using negative consequence as a learning tool. Why would we use this as a learning tool? Who came up with this idea? Who? Mimics. That's what. Oh, shit. Damn. Are you fucking kidding me? This is mimics? I need a minute. Are you fucking kidding me? Wow. It makes sense. Holy shit. This is what we call imbalanced growth. There it is. Okay, that's the solution. All right, so let me break this down for you. This is what's going on. I went to the University of Alexandria, the ancient University of Alexandria. That is where I got my alma mater from. That is my learning. I studied Plato's entire curriculum. Plato devised a curriculum and he built the entire university based off of his curriculum. So when it came time for me to choose colleges, I chose the Library of Alexandria, the University of Alexandria. And the very first lesson you are taught when you walk into there is lesson 1 is how to learn. And the second rule is how to teach. Deep breath in, deep breath out. In order to know how to learn, you have to learn how to learn. Isn't that logical? Leave it to philosophers. If you want to learn how to learn, you need to first learn how to learn. Yeah. So the first year that you study philosophy, you're actually learning how to learn. The stages of learning is mimic. The second stage is repetition, mirroring, reciprocity. And the third is internalization. Now, when you may have seen this quote. This is a very famous quote. Small minds discuss people. Average minds discuss events. Great minds discuss ideas. This is based off of the steps of learning. If you are talking about people, if you gossip, you are actually in the mimicking stage of learning. This is stage 1. It is common for people between the stages of 1 through 4. And if you graduate to the second level, where you are talking about events and common events, you are actually in the repetition stage. This is common for people between the stages of, anywhere from 1 to stage 5, 6. And if you want to internalize it, you have to get from stage 7 plus. That's where internalization happens. That is when you become an author. Now, a lot of people don't make it to this stage. This is why I have a problem with the Akashic records. This is why I have a problem with religion. Is because if you are repeating somebody else's work, you are repeating. You are a follower. You're not an author. You are in the second stage of learning, if that. You are either mimicking or you're repeating. If you are repeating a religious story, you are following, you are a sheep. So if you are just quoting material from somebody else's work, you're not authoring anything. It's not an original idea. Original idea is authority, authorship, author, authenticity, authentic, authority. You see the commonality here. It's because you've internalized and you are now expanding upon other ideas. And in most cases, the other ideas are not obsolete. This is what I do with my podcast. This is what I do with my life. I am authoring perspective psychology, perspective philosophy. So now, if I were to pull from traditional psychology, I'd be parroting it. I'd be repeating it. But it's obsolete because I'm authoring something new. This is the difference between a visionary, somebody who's internalized a lesson, somebody who's an authority on the subject, versus somebody who's just repeating other people's work. So people who come to me telling me about the Akashic records or telling me about other religions, first of all, I've studied them all. So I'm just hearing old material being recited back to me. It's like, I've already read this book. I don't need this information anymore. I'm now on to authorship. So now repeating information and hearing the same stuff I've already heard for 30 years is not going to serve me. When you go to the school of university, you spend X amount of years. I spent 30 asking questions. It's called Socratic method. Socratic method assumes the role of discipulus, where you keep your mouth shut and you ask questions. You listen to learn. This is, by the way, how you learn. And the third one is keeping an open mind. So when you assume the role of open mind, Socratic method, question everything, and listen to learn, this is how I lived literally for 30 years, from 1995 to literally present day. It wasn't until about 4 months ago when I finally said, I'm all done hearing other people's opinions. It's because I listened to people's opinions for 30 years. All I did was Socratic method and listen to learn and had an open mind for 30 years. I finally maxed that point of my lessons out, and I realized I am officially ready for authorship. Now I am on to the next stage of learning, where I am authoring. I've internalized. But you don't get here without Socratic method, listening to learn, and having an open mind. To get there, you need to go through the stages of mimicry, which is copying. Oh my God, just a minute. I can't stand it. I can't stand it at all. Just give me a second here. I have no tolerance for sounds from my phone. So you have mimicry, which is basically copying behavior. We see this with infants a lot, where a child or an infant, a toddler, will copy the behavior of an adult. This is called mirroring and reciprocity. This is very, very common, especially with your point of relativity. If you look at the philosopher's compass, you have your I of I and then your U of I. So when you are born, it's really important that you use mimicry and repetition to copy, mimic the behavior of your U of I. In most cases, that's going to be your parent. That's going to be your caregiver. Now, the U of I changes with authority over your development through the stages of perspective growth, 12 stages to be precise. And there's more to it than that, but we're just going to focus on the first 6. So when you're born, the I of I is undefined, and the U of I is the mother, traditionally the mother. It's the nurturer. And then at 2 years old, when you move into the second perspective, the U of I becomes the father, the head of the household. Traditionally, again, it becomes the provider. That's the one that makes all the decisions. And your I of I is 100% based upon, by the way, this is mimicry, this is repetition. The I of I is 100% defined by whatever the U of I defines your role as. Then when you move into the third perspective, the I of I is now solid, stable, and says, I'm going to take all of my self-management and my resources, and I'm going to push myself to my limits and learn who I am. So the stage 3 is all about self-definition, learning to trust the self and learning to trust others. This is when, for the first time, you learn how to balance these two in authority, and then the they come into existence. Prior to this point, there is no they. It's just you and this authority. So then, when you move from the third perspective, basically you become your own U of I. You throw everything away and it's just you. So you are your own U of I and you are the I of I at the same time for the third perspective. And it's basically a trial by fire to learn balance between yourself and others. So you learn how to coexist with yourself and others. And if you don't learn this lesson, you're stuck at it. So what ends up happening then, once you learn this lesson, you go on to the fourth perspective, where the U of I is now solid. You have that moral compass, that ethical compass. You have the I of I established, who you are and your identity, and you now have rules and laws in a community, and you have they. So at 4 years old, at the fourth perspective, you're supposed to now be balancing these 3 pieces. You have your U of I, your relativity point of your ethics, your I of I, and your they, your community, your entire group of people. And then you're learning how to basically balance juggle these. Now it's between the I of I and this person over here, the they. So you're learning now accountability. You basically learn how to self-govern, the authority then shifts from the U of I over to the they of I. And the they of I holds basically the rules, the laws, and the authority. And then at stage 5, the authority finally shifts to the I of I. Now the I of I, you, for the self, has the authority. Now this is called accountability. Once you start to learn accountability, you realize that your actions affect the community they and the U of I. Suddenly you become consciously aware of how your actions affect other people. This is habits 5 years old is when this should be taking place. If your parents were healthy parents who gave you a proper sounding parenthood or childhood. At 6, you realize that you are as valuable as they and that it's not a hierarchy, that everybody is equal. And then there's the balance. Those are your first 6 stages of ethics. Now, as you grow through these, you're also internalizing all of these lessons through mimicking, 1, 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, and then repetition, repeating things, repeating the verbal. This continues on with internalization. So at the 7th perspective, you go back to the student where you are just listening and observing, which is the Socratic method, listening to learn and keeping an open mind. That is the 7th perspective. And that is exactly where philosophy, when you attend the school of the University of Alexandria, this is what they were teaching you, is how to get to that point of the 7th perspective. You have to keep an open mind, Socratic method, and you have to listen to learn. So that when you get into the 8th perspective, 8 years old, now you're learning communication skills. You are learning how to speak. You're learning how to articulate. This is when you start clocking in all of the communication hours so that you can start professionally and mastering the art of speech and communication. It is at this point that you now elevate out of the projection stage and you start moving into the communication stage. But until you master that communication skill at perspective 8, it's going to be ineffective communication. You don't become effective at communication until the end of 8th into the 9th perspective. That, again, should be 8 to 9 years old. Once you get to that point, now you can think. Welcome to the art of thinking. Prior to this, you weren't thinking, you were mindless. And that's the problem. You can't do conflict resolution. You can't do data analysis and problem solving until and unless you become a thinker, until and unless you internalize. Now, in an abusive situation, the internalization process gets turned on you. And instead of presenting in the now for problem solving, where you are directly addressing problems in the moment, where your reaction time is almost non-existent, to afford yourself more reaction time, because instead of you basically coping to the now and keeping up with the now and the time frame of now, to buy yourself time, you project into the future so that an internalizer will attempt to navigate and prevent danger and conflict by moving themselves into the future. And that is where they have improbable fictions. That's where they try and predict other people's future. They're trying to control their safety. And that's all this is. Safety control. They're trying to control their safety by determining exactly how to predict another person's behavior, by managing their emotions, the other person's emotions, by I'm going to control or over control my behavior and shrink myself so that my authenticity doesn't trigger anybody else. That way I can keep everybody happy. Now you're looking into people pleasing. So when you project, what you're doing is you are basically punishing yourself. It's this old archaic concept of mimicking and repetition. And that's what you're accessing, is that mimicking and repetition. So you self-inflict corporal punishment to get a negative consequence to prevent something from happening, which is exactly what you need with mimics and repetition when you're at that lower stage of development. But you have a 6th perspective thinker who has an ethical 6th perspective practice, and they're stuck in the 1st and 2nd, because in order to get out of mimics and repetition, you have to evolve into the communication factor. So communication keeps coming up again and again. It keeps setting you back. And if you have a problem with conflict resolution, it's most likely a problem with communication. Communication is that crux that just keeps until you clock effective communication. But if you were taught that it's not safe to speak, you're not going to communicate. And because you are not communicating, you have now literally cut the legs right out from under you so that you don't have a leg to stand on. You don't have the words you need to have conflict resolution, problem solving, boundary setting. you're now completely at the mercy of other people's projections. So instead of communicating, because you suffer from communication, because you don't know how, because communication isn't safe, it isn't safe to use my own boundaries, you then internalize and project that punishment onto the self. Oh, well, I'm going to make sure that I can be one step ahead and predict the future and predict the outcome by shrinking the authentic self so as to not offend the people who over internalize my behaviors. It's an attempt to keep yourself safe. It's a nasty cycle that keeps repeating. So it keeps coming back to, you need to learn communication. You need to effectively start applying communication. And in order to do that, you have to resolve your fear of talking. So fear of talking, and that's it over and over again. It's the fear of speech, the fear of talking. Now, if you associate hurting people and projecting people, like I said, it's this catch-22, and that's really it is. It's a catch-22. So how do you solve a catch-22? If you are in a catch-22 with your psychology, by the way, this is a logic loop, and this is where cognitive dissonance comes from, is this constant logic loop. So people, and I've noticed this, like every mental illness is a logic loop. And the reason why it's a logic loop is because, what did we call it? I saw it on Big Bang Theory. It's actually called something. It's when you have a flow chart and you get into a logic loop. Let me take a look here. Logic loop, flow charts. What is it called? What is it called when you have a flaw in a logic loop? Let me see here. I cannot remember. There's an actual scientific name for this, and I do not remember the name of it. A flawed logic loop. What is it called? It's like a stall out. And I remember the episode very, very specifically. Sheldon he created a flow chart for conversation, and he said, oh, well, what do you like to do? And he went, oh, you don't like to do that? Well, what do you like to do? Oh, you don't like to do that? Well, what? And he kept going back and forth. And Arwitz got up and said, oh, he's got himself into a logic loop, and he creates a little side thing with another alternative. And that's it. You need an alternative. You need an alternative to escape the logic loop. Oh my God, I love the logic of that. The logic loop. That's exactly what he did. You need an escape, an out. You need an alternative. In order to do this, you have to problem solve. So whenever you're caught in a logic loop with Catch-22, my God, I love that fucking book. You basically, to escape the logic loop, you need an alternative that basically branches off and creates an escape option, basically a third option. And once you do that, you can use cognitive behavioral therapy to pause, redirect. And then when you do that, you buy yourself your reaction time. There it is. You buy yourself your reaction time, which means you no longer have to live in the future. You can start being in the present, which will break, in the past, which means it will break the cycle. And so you have your third option. It's almost as if PTSD is the past, post-traumatic stress disorder. But addiction is the present, self-loathing is the future. PTSD is the past. That's when you get caught in a logic loop of the past. Addiction is a logic loop of the present moment. And addiction, eating disorders, that's all need to control. And then self-loathing is future. Interesting. Yeah. So basically, you need to create an alternative to escape your logic loop. And then that alternative is what's going to allow you to overcome the logic loop and slide yourself out of it so you break the cycle. So if you're looking to break a cycle, and every one of us is in a cycle, like mental illness is an absolute cycle, it's a logic loop. So how this happens is this is where we get caught up in not understanding. Basically, you get stuck in not understanding. And when you get stuck in not understanding, you loop through because you don't understand. This is where you must understand in order to get yourself an alternative so you can get yourself out. All right. If you love shit like this, like, subscribe, follow, comment below. Let me know what part of the show resonates with you. And if you want to learn more about what I offer, click on the link below. Thank you so much. And may the kindest of words always find you.